Welcome everybody to the budget portion of our Confetti Festival. We couldn't have a better noise backdrop for this, really hearing what's happening downstairs. I think for me as the superintendent for a short amount of time that we're able to pull together all the educators and students that came today to talk to you a little bit about their confetti moments and how we set opportunities to build those confetti moments. Feels really great. So I appreciate that you all came out. Did anyone already have a chance to walk through at some of the tables? Okay, and maybe you're going to do a little bit more of that afterwards. So you know, just when you do go and walk through, I put out just a volunteer if you would like to be in this confetti festival, and that's what showed up. There was no real tapping on anyone's shoulders. These were the folks that, decided they really wanted to come and talk about the confetti moments that they're seeing in school and then working to set up in school. My portion today is to talk a little bit about school budget and understanding school budget and all the things that need to fall into place for funding in order for that to be downstairs in the ways that it is. So that's what we're going to do a little bit of here today. I'll move through some slides. This is not as robust of a presentation as maybe you've seen me do at the Override Committee or at the Finance and Advisory Board. I wanted to leave rooms for questions. I knew this would be a smaller, more intimate group, so we can leave some time for that. And before I forget, the lovely lady who is changing slides for me is Miss Diane Johnson, and she is our new Interim Director of Finance and Operations here at Stoneham Public Schools. We're very excited to have her. She will probably pop in and out of the presentation. Did you want to say anything about yourself?
I'm happy to be here. I don't think I've completed 3 weeks yet. So it's been a whirlwind tour so far, but I like what I have so far, and I'm delighted to be here. So thank you.
What she didn't say was it's been what did you say, 2 weeks? Not quite 3 weeks, and it feels like about 10. I mean, she's really been doing a lot of, and you'll see that in this particular slide deck. Today we will go through understanding school funding a bit. We will talk about Proposition 2.5 and the override vote that everybody is speaking about and why we're in the position that we need or Stoneham needs to put an override vote on the ballot. We will talk about the history of school funding in Stoneham. That really helps to paint the picture of why we are where we are today as far as funding is concerned. And then the impact of a yes or no vote on December 9th. So we'll run through some scenarios of what it will look like on the school end, regardless of what happens. Our public school funding in Massachusetts and in Stoneham, Massachusetts in general though. So in Stoneham, we're going to talk about the local story here. But what you should also know is that local community support comes through taxes, right? That's how communities get their support. In Stoneham this year, that's 70% of the support that we get in our budget. State support through Chapter 70, which is a per pupil number. We get our state funding from that Chapter 70 in Circuit Breaker, which is a special education funding. Reimbursements for special education. This year in Stoneham, it was 17% from Chapter 70 and 6% from Circuit Breaker. We say those numbers because I think people think that our state funding, our Circuit Breaker, and our Chapter 70 is a lot more than it really is, right? And that's going to come into play when we start to talk about the things that are mandated and not mandated. Whether we get the funding or we don't get the funding, there are some things that are mandated that we pay for. Our federal entitlement grants, so federal special education grants, federal and state competitive grants, private grants, and in some of my other presentations I've actually listed what all of those grants are. This year in Stoneham, all of those grants together are 4% of school funding. You're going to see this laid out really nicely. Don't worry, you didn't miss any of the good stuff. I saved it for you. When you see the pie chart of all the slices of what this funding looks like up against that 70% of local funding in the graph we're going to show you, the pie chart we're going to show you, it becomes really illustrative of what it actually looks like in practice. Fees. So yes, we do have some fees. I think it's funny when schools talk about revenue. Like we're not a revenue space, right? We don't like take revenue in hand over hand, right? But we do charge some fees: athletics, student activities, preschool tuition, optional transportation services, rental of fields and school building spaces, ticket sales for events. Fees from all those sources are estimated to be 3% of the total budget this year. Now that fluctuates, that can change. Luckily, we have this beautiful school that people are going to want to rent some more. So hopefully, we'll stay, at that 3%. But you never know. This can go up and down. And we call this kind of funding. We're not going to bank on having this funding in order to fund something that we know we absolutely must have in case we don't have this funding. And then donations. They're estimated to be less than 1% of Stoneham this year. So all the numbers you're hearing this year, in this presentation, are about this year's budget. And this is that beautiful pie chart I showed you. So you can see that big light blue space, that's all Stoneham taxpayer contribution. And this will be, you'll actually be able to, there's a QR code that's going to give you all of these graphs. You're going to love it. I can't wait for you to see it. We worked on it almost all weekend. And so then you see here, or do you want to talk about the chart a little bit? Diane turned her mic on.
I think one of the things that's really important to remember is that Chapter 70 and Circuit Breaker cannot offset local aid, nor can any of this stuff. And you all are, I'm sure, aware of what's going on in the federal government. So we could very much lose federal entitlement grants. They could disappear. So we could stand to lose that money. It's certainly not going to grow to offset any significant losses at the local level.
In addition to that, what you need to remember about Chapter 70, and this is something that I already always talk to folks about, Stoneham is not that big, right? So our per pupil money for Chapter 70 is figured out based on how many students we have. We lose students, we get less money. We don't support our schools, students leave our schools, we get less money. So that Chapter 70 slice that you see right there is really dependent on what we keep per pupil. Proposition 2.5. Local property taxes, as you may or may not know, I'm thinking you know, can only be increased by 2.5% annually, unless the community votes to raise them by a larger amount. So each year, 2.5% is what they're allowed to raise the taxes. But healthy school budgets increase by 4 to 6% annually. So no matter what the year is, we're already going to be asking, if we have a healthy school budget, for more money than you're allowed to raise the taxes by each year, year over year. Stoneham has never voted for an override, so town and school budgets have been squeezed for many years. So when the town votes this way and doesn't pass an override, that means we don't have permission to raise the levy limit, which means we don't have a healthy school budget year over year, unless the town is able to kick in money from someplace else, which I know was the case last year. That ended up happening. We got some funding. Was it free cash, Dennis? Essentially, yeah, to help, right? But that did not come from raising taxes. This is one of the favorite slides that we've been kind of dragging around from presentation to presentation. It's important to look at this. So if the overrides that were put out didn't pass, what that means is year over year, we were asking for a healthy budget number, and we weren't able to be funded that healthy budget number. And I don't think that's because people didn't want to fund it. It's because the money wasn't there and the overrides weren't passing. It just wasn't there to give, right? So year over year, what that did, that added that number up pretty quickly, right? It compounded. And now we're at the space where when we start to talk about what will happen if the overrides doesn't pass, you're going to hear really large numbers for cuts. Where we've duct tape, Band-Aids like that. We're way past that now. Right? We can't live in that space anymore and expect for our school district to run the way that we want it to run and the way our students deserve it to run and their families deserve it to run. Some of the things that we've noticed since the beginning of the school year and right on through up until now, teachers are leaving for other districts that pay much more because we are significantly below market. And I'll show you some charts that show that in a minute. We lost 25 plus teachers this summer. And then when we were trying to fill positions, young teachers, new teachers were accepting the positions and then getting positions in another district that paid more and declining the positions. So it took us 2 and 3 cycles sometimes to fill some of our new positions. We started the school year with vacancies. We still have some of those vacancies. Now, there's a teacher in every classroom in the general ed space, but some of our special education spaces are not filled. The school budget has not maintained level service for at least the last 4 fiscal years. That's what I just showed you on the slide before. So we talked a little about that. Special education costs are rising both because of the services themselves and increasing demand. So when we're not providing what we need to provide in the general ed spaces, lots of times we'll start to identify students that are qualifying for specialized instruction. We have some slides in a minute that's going to show you what that cycle can look like when we get into that space. And the thing about special education positions that we don't fill, we still have to provide those services. So what ends up happening is we consult out for those services. So outside companies will send people our way so that we can meet the IEP needs, and that costs more money. So if we're not able to bring folks in, it's driving special ed costs up because we still need to provide them, and it's going to be at a higher dollar. And then finally, state funding support has not been enough to turn the tides of rising costs in all areas. It just isn't enough. And I think I hear folks say all the time, this is a state problem. And while those formulas may need to be readjusted, I don't disagree. That isn't happening tomorrow, and it certainly isn't happening in time for our next fiscal year. So while we do need to beat that drum, I agree, and I'll beat that drum with everybody that wants to come and beat it, we need to do something in the meantime. And the only mechanism we have is overriding 2.5. So this is the increasing special education cost cycle. And I'm going to start us here at this. Actually, Diane, will you point out the reduced funding bubble? Reduced funding for regular education, the one closest to you. So right here, what will happen if we have to cut, and you're going to learn this even more in some of the later slides. If we have to cut things that are not mandated. Those are the things in the regular education whole child space. So when we reduce funding in that space, we increase class sizes, and we lose creative opportunities, what's happening downstairs. Okay? Then we diminish our student performance, and we increase behavioral problems. Class sizes are bigger, attention doesn't go to the students as much as it should, more difficult to create those classroom environments where we know kids are thriving, bumps into increased referrals to special education. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say even when special education isn't necessary, because it becomes the only game in town, right? So then we pop up to the top, rising special education expenses, which are mandated that we have to pay for, which means we reduce funding for regular. So you see how this cycle kind of continues and chases itself. And that is not where we want to be operating our district. And right now, we sort of are. What we do want to be doing is this cycle. So pictured on this slide is a cycle that we need to achieve. And in order to do so, we have to move toward increasing our budget 4% to 6% each year. So that increased funding that Diane just pointed to for regular education and whole child learning leads to maintaining class sizes and increasing creative opportunities, what's happening downstairs. Increase student performance and decrease behavioral problems. Engage students that are motivated, that want to come to school. Then it decreases our referrals to special education, and moderate special education expense increases result. This is the goal, right? We need to strategically plan to be in this cycle over the next 3 to 5 years. But in order to do that, we have to be able to fund that space. The budget scenarios that we want to talk about around the yes or the no vote on December 9th are next. And these are the scenarios that I presented at the Financial Advisory Board last week. If the override passes for $12.5 million, You can see our operating budget there, 48, 141, 965. We would be able to pay all bargaining units a fair and equitable wage, keep our teachers in the district, recruit new qualified, highly qualified educators. We have lots of teachers teaching on waivers right now, and thank goodness they're willing to do that. They're helping us out. We've applied for waivers. They've been granted. But we really don't want to have our waiver numbers at the number they're at right now. Restoring reductions from the FY25 budget. So what was not able to be added back into that FY25 budget, those are the ones we target to restore. And then provide for student enrollment growth. So we're always getting new students that come into the district. Hopefully we're keeping it that way. We want our students to stay in Stoneham. And we're also getting some data from the demographic study that we're doing with a third-party company around all the new building that's happening in Stoneham. So we want to make sure we have those numbers when we make our projections. The market salary, why it's so important, and something that I really needed to put on this slide that I didn't do and I should have done. This is the bachelor's, our steps and lanes for where we pay our teachers. The reason Stoneham isn't pictured there is because we haven't even settled a contract yet. So where I pulled this data from, they're not even listed. The number isn't there. But what I can tell you is we pay just under $51,000 for our lowest step on the bachelor scale. Wilmington at the bottom is coming in at 57 there. So it's a real discrepancy. When teachers are seeing that, they're going other places. When you take a look at this here, we're looking mid-market. I think this is another thing that's really important because I've heard lots of folks say, well, we can't pay at the top. This is not the top of the market. Okay, it's not the top of the market. These are the districts we compare ourselves with academically when we're talking about accountability data. There's also some of these districts in the Middlesex League, but there's other districts that folks can kind of go to demographically, geographically rather. We know Stoneham touches Winchester. It's close to Arlington. It's close to Belmont. Those aren't the salaries we're comparing ourselves to, but we're trying to get us in the middle of the market of the comparable districts that we do compare ourselves to outside of the Middlesex League, and some of them are in. Okay. A yes vote for 9.3 million gets our operating budget to 46,041, 965. And this would still prioritize paying all bargaining units a fair and equitable wage. To the extent possible, we'd be able to restore some of the reductions from FY25 budget. And we would have to focus in on the ones that would help us with mandated costs. So that's special education, not the general education space. We're trying to get back to that space. And then to the extent possible, provide for student enrollment growth. So if we don't provide for that growth, that's when the class sizes are going to go up. And that's when the services are going to look different. And then if there is a no vote for the override, that brings our budget to 644,051. Paying all bargaining units a fair and equitable wage. That still has to be our priority. We can't teach our kids with no educators in classrooms. I'm really worried about that. Like that's the top right now on my list. All things are important, but if I don't have educators, good ones, in the spots we need, we're not going to be able to get out of that cycle I showed you before, that perpetual cycle that we want to try to move into that blue wheel, not the beige wheel. To meet wage requirements, it would necessitate 50 to 60 full-time equivalent reductions. What's happening downstairs would not be happening. You see a world language table down there. You see assistant principals tables down there. You see AP language going on down there. You see some of the robotics and the STEM that kids were really excited to come and show and talk about. Those would be the things because they're not mandated. Non-mandated programming would be eliminated. Here's an example of non-mandated programming. So it's all, again, it's all some of those things I just mentioned. It's all that stuff that's going on downstairs. It's common planning time for teachers when they're able to come together and do that work and plan for that work that you see. Internship programs for our students, work study, child development. I'm just naming some randomly. Chorus, athletics. field trips. Some of the things that I just named, that's why kids come to school. They come to do that. And then their academics support that work that they do. Right? So it's not frosting. It's not like what I call frosting on the cake. This is like whole child education that would be in jeopardy. So that was a snack, right? What we wanted to make sure that we did, though, was give you, and we put together a school budget information flyer. So I've given you some of the high-level things, but what I want to show you is what this budget, you can certainly click there, but I'm also going to show you what that looks like. Basically, you're getting that understanding of Proposition 2.5. We talked about that. Here are some of the big budget drivers. You can see about those. You're going to get some information about circuit breaker in Chapter 70 and some of those graphs that show the proportions of what we spend and where it comes from. You're also going to see some of those slides. The master's one is actually in here, so you can see the differences is pretty much the same as the bachelor's degree. All of those non-mandated potential cuts and our mandated funds are in there as well. You'll see the difference between a level service budget and a level funded budget. And you will also see that fiscal year slide. And then finally, those are the three scenarios that I just talked through. So I'm encouraging you to scan that. That QR code will go out tomorrow to everybody in the community. You know, tell your friends, share it with your friends for those people that couldn't come. I really appreciate that you came and you listened. I'm sure there's many of you sitting here that have already listened. So I appreciate that you came to listen to me talk through this presentation. I'm happy to answer questions for a few minutes before we take a break for our 5 o'clock presentation. So if anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to ask.